Hey, everybody. Welcome to week 156. And man, we're coming in hot. So I apologize. Man, I can't take this guy anywhere or join him at the office anywhere. We just finished a seminar, or a web panelist group on talent retention strategies in the workforce. And that was really good. But man, we were coming in hot off of this one. And so I think we had failed to send the link in a timely manner to Atul. Sorry about that. It's good to have you. And Jack Santinello's on, but week 156, and this one's going to be really good. So anybody, the drill, hit us up with the Q&A, and you can harass us on the chat, but be nice to Atul because he's way smarter than all of us combined. And he's got the insights that we're all looking for on like what's happening with AI, this whole chat GPT. Is this going to destroy the world? Is it going to make our lives better? Is it going to be both? I don't know. But there are ways that businesses can harvest and harness this information and technology. And so I can't think of a better person than Atul to help us understand what's going on. So before we launch into that, I know you've got some things on your mind, I think, right?
Yeah, this one's real personal for me for a couple reasons. First off, really happy to have you as a panelist, Atul. And the funny, side note is Atul found us from this webinar, when we first started.
True.
So it's like that's for everybody on here, man. If you work really hard, then you can aspire to be a free panelist, on the BGW webinar, pays a world of dividends. But in all seriousness, I'm really passionate personally about this topic because, I can't remember the name of the website that someone sent me, but it's one of those where you can look up your job and figure out what's the likelihood that a machine will be doing it in the next 3 to 5 years. And before I could even type in accountant, it actually has the top 5 jobs that a computer will do the job. And accountant was number freaking 2. So my point, so like for me, I mean, this topic is mission critical. In other words, like if we don't get ahead of this as a company, as BGW, and have an offensive posture, then we're going to be the buggy whip manufacturer, out there, So I think the reason, is we've explored other topics that are all around, helping you mitigate risk. I mean, this is like one of those where, hey man, this could be some real serious shit. Sorry about the language there, Gary. If you don't, even if you're in a blue collar business, if you just take blue collar as an example of, go to anybody and say, hey, tell me about the blue collar manufacturing thing, 20 years ago relative to today, what they would say is the CNC machine has revolutionized, manufacturing to where the blue collar person that was putting stuff together, that same blue collar person now needs to know how to program a CNC machine. So it's just, this one just feels like it's moving at an extremely rapid pace. So I'm really excited to hear more about this. And for the most part, I'm just going to shut up and listen. But that, I just wanted to let everybody know. I mean, that I selfishly, I think it's important because if we don't get it right, we're going to be out of business. No. So but for everybody else that's a client of the firm or, a loyal listener, it's like, we all need to be developing an offensive strategy. To me, this is just as important as having a healthy balance sheet, is having a strategy about how this will impact your business and be moving towards, the execution of that strategy. Otherwise, you're not going to have a freaking balance sheet. So anyway, tirade done, Gary.
No, that's good. Yeah.
I mean, I could talk about idiots in Washington, the budget, but I won't.
Well, we'll say that for next week because it's an evergreen topic. So, and I am going to kick the mic over to Jack here in just a moment, but it was 3 years ago this month, Atul, that you reached out to me on LinkedIn, and it was 11:15 at night, if I remember correctly. And
that's normal. 11:15 is early morning for me.
yes, and I mean, I'm still working at that point, and you said something like, hey, I've been reading your stuff on LinkedIn. I was on your weekly webinar, and I wish every CPA thought like you guys. Would you take somebody in Tampa, Florida? And that was never an option for us before COVID. And I said, well, let's do a Zoom. I'll record it, and I'll go back to the rest of the leadership team and make sure that they're cool with that. But if you fit, then we'll just see. Well, it's been a great journey with you. And, again, we didn't see that pivot coming. That kind of hit us with like a freight train, and we had to pivot. But I think this thing is coming faster with AI and whole chat GPT. Some of the stuff that I've seen already in the last couple of weeks has kind of been blowing my mind, besides the ability to get better dad jokes than what Jack is able to do. One quick thing, Joe Farrell is back. Thank you, Papa Joe. It's good to have you back. And he says in the chat, I'm not actually on, I'm having my robot substitute listening. So he said, based off 60 Minutes, your kids could be playing with a team of robots. So that could be true too. So Jack, you've got a background, I have a feeling, so you're gonna have to talk so that we can see what you go, and then we'll kick it back to Atul.
Hello, Gary. I think I can do that. All right, so the big reveal, kind of me, I'm on the spot. I like to go where the action is. So I went straight to the source. And so
Oh,
Well
that's
played.
good.
And thank you, Atul, for joining us as well. I'm sure you're going to get to this, but I'm just very curious as to how pervasive this really is. And I think it's much, much, much more than any of us really realize of what's already going on in the background when we're going along our everyday lives. So, if you could infuse that into your discussion as to, hey, bet you didn't know that when you do this, that is what's happening with artificial intelligence.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, so Atul Arya, did I say that right, Atul?
As close as you can get in this lifetime, so you're all right.
Okay, yeah, I'm not Indian, and so I just can't get all of those nuances right. But I like hanging around the guys that are way smarter than us, which are typically a lot of Indians, man. And we've Chirag Patel here, like he runs circles around most of us, so we like that too. So Atul, give the audience a little background of you and Blackstraw.ai, and then let's go into how, what are you doing? How are businesses leveraging this stuff? And then, how can we, what should we be doing and what should we be avoiding? Because I'm sure there are scam artists out there, just like with ERC today, when we were talking last week, there's a lot of scam artists in the whole employee retention tax credit thing. And there are legitimate ones there too. So if you could kind of take us down that progress, and then I'll be monitoring questions, and I'll interrupt as I need to.
All right. So thank you for having me, guys. And this is like coming full circle, right? I think, as you mentioned, I saw you guys on a webinar, and Gary, if you remember, I'd already been through 3-4 different CPAs in our short existence, and I was like, hey, I hope I stick to this one for a while now, and that's happened. Obviously, there are the things that happen in any relationship, but this has worked out well. On me, I run a company called Blackstraw.ai. We are about a 5-year-old company right now, started in 2018. Roughly about 400 people based between US, Canada, and India. What we essentially enable is AI adoption in enterprises of all sizes. Our whole idea is first telling people what's not possible with AI and then telling them what is, because that's really important in this present ecosystem where it is chaos, where everybody thinks that AI is going to just take over planet Earth, and all kinds of feelings, or maybe rightly, wrongly, but all kinds of feelings that exist towards AI. So that's what we do: enable enterprises to get onto an AI journey, which is as good or as bad as the data that sits in your enterprise, right? You based on everything that you guys feel and hear, you might feel that AI is commoditized and implementations are easy, and anybody can, and then it can kind of get onto it. But the point is, it is as good as the data that enterprises have, or the models are trained on. So that's what we do: create data strategy, and then eventually AI implementations for companies. Now, anyway, getting back to this, right? So I was actually there's something called CDO, or Tampa Bay Tech runs forums, physical forums like this, and I was asked a question in that forum about, hey, this technology is getting too advanced too quickly, and what do you feel about it? And I told them that, hey, the first machine learning model was written in 1943.
Wow.
And so it's not as if the adoptions taken is happening too quickly. It's in fact about time that people started using it. The only thing that's happened is that it's become very relevant and close to personal lives. If you think about, it's almost like an inflection point, right? With Chat GPT. Before Chat GPT came in, people used to, I hear these words, sounds good, looks interesting, but sure. But then when Chat GPT came in and people saw it happening on their screens, and people were putting in all kinds of questions, and the site crashed because there was so much influx, and people were getting like pretty smart answers out of a system. Suddenly people thought that now everything's going to change, right? But truly speaking, it's been an evolution over the last 60-70 years. And it's not something that anybody should be afraid of. That's point number one. The second point is, to Adam's point, what really happens to various kinds of jobs and situations and stuff like that. I think what's real this is my view, of course. What's really going to happen is that, since you're going to be having not just pure data entry kind of operations being done through systems and machines, even certain decisions being taken by machines, the jobs are going to be evolving from a more supervisory and corrective methodology. So what I mean is, so if you think about air traffic control, right, or any kind of industry that is ultra critical, right? What really happens in those ecosystems is that the checks and balances on machines taking actions have to be managed. So if, let's say, there was let's say you could automate book entry, for example. Obviously, right, you could somebody could the data entry in books could be automated. But now, as you're trying to take decisions on whether that happened, whether that allocation happened correctly or didn't happen correctly, that supervisory controls have to be developed, and those have to be done by humans. Because if the problem with even humans taking decisions is that they can take it wrong, correct? And that's why you have checks and balances and layers above that. Now, with machines and at scale taking decisions, if you don't have supervisory control, which in my opinion will be what we call as human in the loop, and people will have to have good and pretty solid domain expertise to even challenge decisions being taken by machines. That's what the jobs would evolve into. Standardized canned jobs will get automated for sure. But what will get even more important is that as these decisions are being taken, and they're being taken at extreme pace and scale, the supervisory control and the checks and balances on that humans will have to keep, those kind of jobs would increase. Attention to detail, right, will suddenly become a huge factor, because guess what, you'll have very nuanced mistakes being committed by the machine. It will not be very evident. So there'll be very nuanced kind of decisions and mistakes that will be committed, and corrections have to happen at that level and at that minute level of action. And that's what I think these jobs and ecosystems will evolve into. But I also do think that there's no reason to be afraid of any of this. This whole idea about machines taking over the world, etc. All of this is way too far off. Right now, people are just struggling with good data itself, right? If you think about most of the enterprises, large enterprises, their entire challenge is, hey, do I even have good data to train my machines from? I have like 60 sources of data. Which one is the right data, right? And now, so that's one part of the story, right? That's the reality. The problem, though, is that the machines are really powerful to learn from. So what we have to prevent is that these machines learning from this wrong set of data, right? And that's why when you hear all this, and people have all kinds of feelings on that, when you have these big industry leaders coming in saying, hey, take a 6-month pause in training on training these algorithms, or just slow down a little bit. I don't think they're really afraid of, the technology itself or its adoption. What they're really saying is, hey, what are the checks and balances on the data from which these machines are being trained from, right? Because they're just going to be taking actions based on whatever they're getting trained on. And they're really saying, hey, get this right before they start taking these decisions, and have significant feedback loop from these decisions being taken where humans have to come into being. I think a lot of domain specialist jobs will increase over the years. In fact, it will be the other way around, because what you'll have is, if you think about this entire ecosystem of AI, right, the technical term of that is called labeling. But what that really does is annotation of data to teach the machine how it should learn. And that work has to really happen through people who are really well versed with the domain. And I think what will increase is domain labelers, people who can understand the domain and provide that annotation for the machine to learn from. I see a lot of increase in that kind of jobs. Obviously, jobs will become different, but they're completely going away. I don't buy that argument, at least personally. That's my view, at least initially.
I love your term, a human in the loop, because I think that's, that's just a great term, because without that, you could have this runaway, self-perpetuation of even erroneous stuff, right?
Yeah, if you think about any of any of the solutions that are built even today, one of the big challenges is managing the inaccuracies of models in production environment, right? So there is no model known to mankind that is 100% accurate. And that's the problem with this entire thing, where people are simply saying, hey, whatever this bot said is right. And that's the problem, right? You have to verify, validate that, have a human in the loop to correct it or have an opinion on it, and then feed the machine back. So those kind of feedback loops have to have a level of supervision to it. And that's what the term human in the loop is. And those are going to remain consistent. I do not know of a human being who's always right. So I don't see a machine is going to be always right. There's always checks and balances. Yes,
Yeah.
be a level of automation. A smarter guy does a lot more things on his head rather than writing on the paper. But that's the level of automation that you'll start seeing. But will you have to have checks and balances 100%, right? And the jobs will become more that checks and balances on actions being taken by machines.
So Atul, a lot of our audience, they're primarily privately held businesses, business owners, business leaders. that are not necessarily, when I think of enterprise, I think of Bank of America, I think of these very large enterprises.
All sizes, enterprises of all sizes.
Okay, and so for, let's say, small to mid-size companies, what are some of the applications that you're seeing that companies are kind of leveraging and utilizing well, or that are unaware, or that would be kind of low-hanging fruit, where to start?
I mean, it depends, of course, on various types of business, but certain functions are very common, right? If you think about the first function for any business is the sales function, right? If you don't have clients, you don't have a business, right?
Right.
So that's where the business really starts from. And I guess one of the top ways, in my opinion, that everybody should integrate their sales funnel, sales processes, is using the power of some of the social media ecosystems, along with curated AI tools, right? So if you think about so there's this concept called web scraping, right? You scrape the web automatically for a bunch of, let's say, clients or potential clients based on criteria that you might feed into a bot, and it gives you a lot of data. Now, where AI really comes into being is that making sure that what you end up seeing is most relevant and most meaningful, right? So top 5 clients that you should really hit go after, considering that you might have bandwidth constraints. The other thing that which we have built, for example, which I think is applicable for every industry, is evaluating resumes, right? Everybody hires, right? So what's after sales, what's the most other important thing that anybody does? You go and hire employees, right? Now when you're hiring, and especially depending on the scale of hiring, you might hire at scale, you might hire at even lower numbers. Resume sifting is a highly tedious job, and you end up paying recruiters, and you end up paying all kinds of people to do that. So I mean, if cost is a parameter that you want to manage, resume evaluation and scoring solutions exist in the ecosystem. Or if nobody if somebody wants it, you can talk to us, wherein you get a very curated list of top 5 or 10 resumes that you should go after, right? Or you should reach out to, rather than first go through hundreds of resumes when you open up a job postings, right? So that's a very common theme across all kinds of businesses, right? One is the sales cycles, the other is obviously the candidates, and figuring out how to tap into the top candidates. So there are very specific AI tools that exist for it, so that you don't have to go through this tons of sifting, both on the client side as well as on the candidate side. But then I mean, depending on the business, right, there's like so many different applications I can talk about. I mean, is there like a particular profile of people that are there on this webinar that I can talk to, like, types of businesses?
Yeah, we've got to kind of have the gamut, from service providers to manufacturers to distribution companies. One of the things that we've done here, we used a group. It was called AWIN, AIWIN, I believe. They rebranded to that, but they use AI for helping shorten the cycle time on accounts receivable. And that has been, quite helpful. Traditional CPA firms, that's a huge deal. It's a deal for some of our legacy clients. All of our new clients, we put on monthly repeating, like a subscription, whether it's through ACH or whether it's through your credit card. So we don't have that issue. But it is for legacy. But that's been helpful. But like this RPA, do you guys get into RPA? Can you describe what that is and where some of those kind of functions
Yeah.
can help?
So RPA basically in a very layman's term, well, the full form of RPA is robotic process automation. That's what RPA stands for.
Yes.
But in a very simplistic kind of terms for a layman to understand, it's essentially automation of button clicks. So let's say you have a human going in and clicking the mouse on 10, 15 buttons on a screen. You can essentially have this RPA, or it's called a bot, to essentially mimic those button clicks, and they become even more relevant when you have to go through multiple screens, right? They're not that valuable when you have just one screen and multiple, even simplistic scripting languages could have done that. But what RPAs allow, and if somebody has used mainframe systems, mainframe has like, a truckload of screens that people have to go through, and there's only one way you can go to it, by pressing F9, F9, F9. So what these robotic process automation tools really allow is, simulating button clicks and data entry. Basically, all the data entry operations, right, based on button clicks is what they essentially end up doing. Now, depending on the business that you guys are involved in, if there's a lot of effort and cost being spent on people doing repetitive work on button clicks. They just have to follow a process and procedure and click buttons and enter data. A lot of that is automated using RPAs. The biggest provider of that is UiPath. So UiPath is one of the top companies that does provides RPA, but they're plenty, right? But that's the essential application and applicability of that.
So I've got a couple questions that have come in already, which is not surprising. So this one's from Matt. Would Atul share any specific experience he has with the employers using games to screen applicants based on the candidate's prowess in numerosity, problem solving, decision-making under stress, and other attributes? Good question.
Right. So if I understand the question right, is that, how do are the systems and softwares available or that we've built that allow for candidate evaluation based on, let's say, their facial expressions, their written behavior? Is that what is that what that question?
Yeah, it sounds like it's like using games, so maybe it's subversive in that, where it looks like it's a game, but it's actually evaluating your decision making and inducing stress into the game. How do they respond, etc.
So basically, are we at the Kobayashi Maru? Star Trek fan. I had to get it in there somewhere. Yeah.
All right, that's scary because I was kind of thinking the same thing. So.
The thing is that behavior evaluation for evaluating resumes is done in various ways, especially in companies where you have scale. Like, so for example, there are certain companies we work for, I'll not name the clients, but large temporary workforce employment companies where you have to hire, let's say, 10,000, 12,000 people in a day, right? Because you're trying to do like temporary jobs, right? But you might be going to a store, a retail store. So you don't want this guy to be doing like, be involved in like theft inside the store, right? So you have to evaluate that person based on, various parameters, his facial expressions, or, as the question suggested, using providing certain games and extracting behavior patterns for that kind of a person. So there are various ways that's done. One is just video interviews, where the video interviews of, let's say, when you're trying to do it at scale, you kind of get them recorded, and then on the videos you're essentially saying based on facial expressions of where the person is looking or how that person is answering the question, you're essentially rating those persons on various behavioral attributes. Similarly, from a gamification standpoint, same thing, right? You are essentially there are two ways of doing this. One is, when the person is playing a game, One is based on actions he's taking on the game, but also through his facial expressions, right? So it's not just the game actions that he's taking, but also his expressions during the act of playing the game, that you're basically analyzing the people. Think about, and I'll say this, but think about nurses, right? Nurses have to get into hospitals, and in a lot of cases in the US, especially, nurses are not on permanent staff of hospitals. They're temporary workforce. Now, there's only a level of evaluation that if you do not go through these kind of sophisticated or more scalable tools that a human can do or can be employed to do. I mean, how many nurses can you interview in a day? Like one person, 10, 15, 20, 50, 100. But then the needs for nurses is like 16,000 a day, right? So you have to employ patternistic techniques like this, like, mood identification from games, from just certain questions being asked, and then extracting that information and rating them and then passing them on based on the level of complexity and, sensitivity of a job.
So to just continue on that before we move to Robert Mayetta's question, he says, are facial expressions really valuable proxies for competence, confidence, and capabilities?
See, now the answer is yes, and then I'll caveat it a little bit. See, the thing is, in certain situations, those are the only ways to do it. Like, as I said, when you're trying to do scaled recruitment, right? You're not going to have an ability of a human to sit behind and talk to 100 people, right? What will you go by, right? When you have like hundreds of people having the same kind of technical attributes, or their resumes are the same, how would you choose, right? So in those kind of situations, these are the only softer parameters at scale that you can go by, because there's no human way of possibly employing so many people to evaluate those people. Now, if you had a human, is it as effective as that? Potentially the answer is no. But is it good enough to do the job for a scale kind of a placement? The answer to that is yes.
Yeah, that's right. I think in that specific example, you heard all the, body language biases and stuff like that, when you interview somebody over the phone and then you see them live, it's like this, kind of a bias comes in through both. So it's when you first started talking, I was thinking, whatever. And then as you started talking more, I was like, oh, I could totally see how that would be relevant, because that is that, like, you getting comfortable with a person is all body language, not language.
Yeah.
and not capability. So that's pretty cool.
Right. And I guess in certain cases, that's the only possibility you're left with, right? As I said, when you're trying to do, and maybe I'll tell you. So if you think about retail inventory collection, right? When you go to, there are a bunch of companies that do inventory collection in retail stores, right? They have like a staff force of 160,000, right? And you're trying to, and they have huge attrition problems because people can go drive an Uber, go to McDonald's. So, they're dealing with that kind of people, right? So if you're trying to do that level of recruitment, right, you have no other options but to use these kind of tools, and they're reasonably good.
Yeah. All right. So this goes off the beaten path from recruitment, but into something that all of us use pretty frequently, probably, PowerPoint. So this is from Robert Mayetta. I hear that Microsoft has put AI into PowerPoint to where I can have the presentation generated using this AI. When will I be able to start using this feature?
That's a good question for Microsoft. But essentially what they've done as part of their alpha release to certain users is, and I'm sure you guys know this, that Microsoft is a big investor in ChatGPT, right? In fact, they put in the first $1 billion from a cloud credit standpoint, and now they've also put an additional $49 billion. They own significant stake into that. So essentially the idea is that as part of the Microsoft suite of products, including presentations and Excels or whatever, providing the ChatGPT functionality to essentially, as you colloquially ask that, hey, also you have to understand, right, when you're on a Microsoft suite of products within an enterprise, you also have access to the databases that are inside a particular company, right? So what you can essentially do is you can link it to those databases and basically say, hey, you know what, I have a presentation with the CIO of my company. He is interested in trying to figure out, you know, what's the sales outlook for next month. Can you go to HubSpot or whatever, Salesforce or whatever, and pull out all the leads and, you know, create a presentation and provide a growth story, right? Now that entire process, like the way I just said it, is essentially a bunch of natural language. It's natural language, right? It's just colloquial language being translated into queries, going to relevant databases, picking it, and then essentially through the learning that has come from, you know, historical data and the art of creation PowerPoints, that's used to come up with those PowerPoints. I think you will have that pretty soon. I would give it till the end of next year where everybody would have it on the Microsoft Suite.
Wow. Interesting. So this is kind of out of left field as I usually do, but think about this, Atul. I'd like you to weigh in on this. You know, cybersecurity is a huge issue. What would you be concerned about, or maybe you're not concerned about? But so you're going through Chat GPT, it's doing queries and it's writing your next song or whatever, your next presentation to your board members, whatever. What security risks do you anticipate that there might be, or that are already out there? What, you know, have you run into those kind of things or concerns from other business owners?
Yeah, I mean, today, if you think about, even if you go and look at where most of the private equity money is flowing in, it's in the whole cybersecurity paradigm, right? Because as all of this becomes, you know, and all of this is data and data intensive, right? Protecting that data sources will become the most important thing. In fact, what you've started seeing is that there are a lot of, and we are involved in pretty heavy projects there, where a lot of SaaS players are being replaced by in-house IPs. So if you think about, you know, software as service solutions, where you are having to give your data, let's say, just think about DocuSign, for example, and nothing against DocuSign, by the way, right?
Yeah.
But DocuSign has everything with respect to your contracts, contractual information, you know, and you're basically going by their word that, hey, you know, nobody else has access to it and your subscription is private to yours, right?
Yeah.
And the idea is that, you know, what are the checks and balances that they are maintaining in their paradigm, that, you know, that information, first of all, is not transcended within their organization, and then definitely not outside. So I think the risk of cybersecurity and, you know, the cross-pollination of data, all of that exists as soon as you move out of your firewalls, right? That is 100% prevalent. I mean, we are just like flooded with all kinds of gadgets around us, which I don't, you know, I think all of you guys have seen documentaries on how, you know, what you're being said is heard all the time. So I think the data security part is definitely a concern. Now, how do you I think you have to be, you cannot go overboard in either direction. I think there are layers and layers. There's a set of data which is completely sacrosanct, right? And and I think that has to remain behind your firewalls. It should absolutely not even be transcended to any SaaS providers, and you should keep heavy controls on them. Then there are certain elements of data that you're like, hey, listen, as long as, you know, we have cloud security protocols, there's significant security that you can evaluate from your IT folks standpoint. Sure, it's okay to leave my premise as long as I'm guaranteed of these protocols. And then there are certain data that you're okay with public knowledge, right? I think ecosystems have to create their layered data set, data structures, saying this data is sacrosanct, goes nowhere, absolutely nowhere. Don't even want to deal with insurances and whatnot. If somebody else is hacked, and, you know, now what am I telling my clients, that hey, they got hacked, and, you know, there's no conversation, right? I mean, so I think there are layers and layers, and you have to kind of maintain that for each organization.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and we're seeing it in the government. So we know that the Epstein files are sacrosanct and all of our national security is not. So just had to throw that in there. Here's a question from Sue. Really good. Is there any AI regulation we should know about? For example, when do we have to disclose when something is created by AI? Ooh, that's a good question, Sue.
See, the thing is right now, this industry is what you guys are really talking about is generative AI, right? So if you think about the GPT part of chat GPT is actually generative algorithms. So when something generates something, let's say, it creates, a picture, you could actually, I do not know if you guys saw the 60 Minutes very recently, where the CEO of Google had the anchor just throw in a bunch of words and say, hey, describe this, and it created a picture out of it, right? The reality of it is that these are all things that are happening right now. I don't think there are a lot of regulations around it, or how do I say this? Enforceable regulations around it. There could be moral regulations about it. Yeah, you're supposed to disclose it, but I don't think you can be held on a court of law that, by the way, you did not disclose that it was system generated, and hence you're going to be. So I guess some of those will come, but I don't think it is right now that evolved to a point that that they have already been created. But I think they will have to the ecosystems will have to create very specific laws for their domains and industries very quickly. But I don't think enforceable exists today.
So that's a great thought, and this is something that in a conversation I had in the last week with somebody, I don't remember who, but we were talking about the impact on students. And all right, so you're writing a term paper, for your junior year, whatever, in college. Hey, Chat GPT, just do this. Like, how do you know what somebody actually created themselves versus they just said, hey,
I will tell you what's happened there, and I'll tell you the next level. So what happened there is there started becoming, there are checks available on these assignments where you could actually figure out that it came through Chat GPT. But then there is a new software that was created. It was called Rephrase. So what it does is it takes the Chat GPT content and rephrases it into a different thing. So it doesn't even appear like it's coming from Chat GPT, because now it's completely rephrased. So now nobody can catch it, right? So essentially you kind of killed that check software itself because you rephrase the entire thing. So people will find out ways to
scam the system,
overcome this, right? I mean, so those regulations will have to be, I think, enforceable before people, because then the question is, hey, if you're caught, then what, right? Because right now it's like, yeah, sure, I did it. So now, okay, you're telling me I should not have done it. Sure, I'll do it now differently. I'll do it on my own. But I think it's all going to be like there have to be some legal ramifications in situations where it warrants it. Otherwise, there's no point even in fact doing it, right? I mean, it is what it is. I mean, I should be able to generate a poem for myself and just say that, hey, what, I want to read it out in a party. So what, right? So I did it.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting. So what happens with that is the legal framework, because it doesn't exist, you have to fall back on other frameworks. So in the academic space, you say, well, okay, this isn't your original work. Copyright, okay, who owns the copyright? And therefore, do you have permission to use this information? Now, generally speaking, academic, scientific, educational are permitted uses of others' information that has been copyrighted, except when you're writing a paper for education purposes, turning it into your professor kind of thing. So that is an interesting arena. The other is, what are we going to allow our employees to do? And going back to the security and breach and everything else, that what are we going to allow our employees to do as far as using company issued computers to start putting together these poems and everything else in their free time, or even to do things related to our work. So imagine allowing access of this, and you may tell me differently, that we're not, that security issue really isn't there because of the way it works and the way it integrates and the way it pulls information, because really all it's doing is taking your request, formulating something and throwing back into you. It's not really accessing your system, but let's presume that it does access your system. Now you have access to potentially client records on a legal field, client records on a CPA field, medical records in a medical field, in the medical field, hospitals, et cetera, medical practices. So how does this work? And is it as I said, that it is taking your request, pushing it out, it's doing its thing, and then giving you a result, but not really accessing your computer? Or do we just not know yet how pervasive it is actually into our infrastructure and our various companies?
No, sure. If you're talking about the Chat GPT version that exists online, is that what you mean?
Sure.
It doesn't access your computer. It does not, right? But the point is, so the example of the gentleman who said, hey, if it's linked to my company provided Microsoft PowerPoint ecosystem, right?
Right.
Now, in that case, you will provide permissions for it to access your databases, system databases, or company provided databases, right? Because otherwise it will not be able to spit out meaningful information. In those cases, now, can it? Yes. Does it, like in the present ecosystem? No, because these are so slightly technical, but essentially what really happens in the AI ecosystem is there's a training ecosystem when you train the machine, and then there's an inference ecosystem. When you say inference, that's when the model is in real time producing output. What you guys are right now all seeing as part of ChatGPT is the inference part of it. It's not the training part of it, right? Now, is this data that, after you answer a question and then re-ask a question, is that data being then eventually used to feed back to the training algorithms? Absolutely, I'm sure, 100%, right? That's how these guys are learning, right? But they're not accessing your databases, system databases at this point of time, because there's no interface, right? These are just inference pipelines. Now, when you get into your Microsoft suite or your Google suite interacting with your system databases, yeah, they will have access. And I think that's what's needed at that point in time, right? So.
Yeah.
And then, and a totally unrelated question, but something that has come up in I've seen in discussions about the difference between a sophisticated system that is deemed AI, but what they're doing is implementing a sophisticated system of implementing algorithms to do certain things, versus, I want to say, having a conscious, the whole like Skynet thing. I mean, all the sci-fi things, but at some point, is there a differentiation between having a very sophisticated algorithms that are aggregated together versus what I think many people think AI is truly, which is something man-made that is thinking on its own and making decisions, and possibly implementing ethics, morality, and those kind of things. I mean, I assume we're way far away from that, but I mean, that's an assumption that I think some of us are making. So where are we kind of in the spectrum of that kind of thing, where we unleash something that has the ability to think and make decisions based on, let's say, the decision would be, well, see, and I struggle with this because I think about someone who has do not resuscitate orders, or maybe doesn't, and there has to a decision that has to be made. And so you turn over this decision to artificial intelligence, let's say, and this is a bizarre example, but in that instance, is it that the artificial intelligence is taking into consideration the person's age, health, do they have grandkids, what is their lifestyle? I mean, all those things, or is it, at some point going to say, well, because in order to not create an emotional strain on the family, I'm going to make this decision. Again, bizarre example, but that's kind of what I'm getting at, which is that next decision point, which is based on ethics and morality.
I understand. So AI systems, by definition, make predictions and recommendations. Whether they end up taking decisions is up to you, right? They can now you can. So what's the difference between recommendation, prediction, and decision? The thing is that I can predict something, and based on that, I can recommend something to you. Whether you want to enforce that recommendation or not enforce that recommendation is completely your option. Correct. So that's the difference. So the AI systems right from time immemorial have been recommendation systems. They are not really decisioning systems. You can make them decisioning systems automatically, but you can also have a human in the middle to say that, okay, you know, whatever is being suggested, whether I should implement that or not, right? So that's one part of the story. The other part of the story that you're really asking is that, hey, you know, is there any kind of a bias that is generated in their recommendation algorithms, right? So and this is a theoretical answer, and then there's a practical answer. The theoretical answer to this is that the machines only learn from historical and past data, the data that they're fed into. So if, let's say, whatever was happening earlier was biased, then they would learn the bias. If whatever was happening earlier was not biased, they would not learn the bias, right? So that's the theoretical answer. The more practical answer is that when the amount of data that these machines are trained from transcends, like, you know, terabytes, gigabytes, and, you know, you're going to completely, nobody can clearly identify the patterns for themselves, whether, you know, it was through a predominantly biased training set or an unbiased training set. So that's why the real focus has to be, and that's how I started off. The real focus has to be, what's the data set and ecosystem that these models are being trained from? Can we make sure that they were unbiased? If the answer to that is yes, then the model is not going to generate a bias on its own, right? I mean, it can, but then there are ways to correct that bias too. But if you think about, again, just going back to that industry, because it's something that, you know, everybody is familiar with, the recruitment industry. And now, are humans by nature biased when they make recruitment? I think the answer is yes, right? I mean, we can all claim that we are super unbiased when we're doing these recruitment. You know, there is a little bit of a whatever you can call it, you know, likability, unlikability. There's a little bit of a bias that creeps in when we are all doing recruiting, right? Now, if that set is being used to train machines, yes, it will be a bias set.
But what I hear you saying is that the bias can eventually be diluted by more and more data. So the larger the data set, the biases get diluted to normalize.
Larger data set that is that by in its inherent nature is unbiased will eventually lead to an unbiased recommendations set generated through AI algorithms.
So that leads right into, and I'll get to Robert Mayetta's question about when AI realizes it doesn't need humans, but I'm going to save that for later. That definitely how. But
AI doesn't need humans. Humans need AI. AI is AI, right? It doesn't not a living object, right? Why do they need humans? They're like we are recommending this, do this. Humans need AI to, you know, make scalable decisions. That's how it is.
all right, good. You've answered it. Thank you. But here's the interesting. So this has to do with bias. So wondering about the risks of bias is for AI involved in HR. While in some ways AI should be by nature unbiased, but what if certain biases develop or unintended biases are initially? What risks would that present to an employer legally and from a diversity perspective? And then the second part, he says, sometimes hiring a non-traditional qualified candidate, and that has been me. Like AI would kick me out of every job that I've ever had, really, truly, and I'm not kidding. But a non-traditionally qualified candidate can bring perspectives and sparks that wouldn't exist if you only used cookie cutter qualifications. And that's where Atul, you know, I want you to weigh in on this, but I love this term that you mentioned about keeping a human in the loop, which, you know, versus just letting it run. And, you know, it'd be like having a car going on autopilot without a human being in the front seat, that probably not a great idea. So why don't you weigh in on that one?
No, as I said, right, as I said, the problem with, okay, so I think I can answer it differently. Let's say, you were recruited by somebody, right, Gary? Now, how would you qualify that was a bias or not? Let's say a human did it. How would you say it was a bias or not? Right? It just happened, right? It happened. Now, unless you can peep into that person's mind and figure out his subconscious training and stuff like that, the guy is not going to say. Now, the thing is, the machines are simply learning from the data that they are fed into, right? Now, when you go to, let's say 100, let's say there were 100 times that a CPA was, or 1,000 or 1,000,000 times that a CPA was hired based on certain specs. Now you give that data to the machine. It will essentially, next time similar kind of candidates are provided, it will automatically rank those candidates at the top. That's all it will. It's going to recommend based on data it learns from. It is not, now, well, there is another concept of creating synthetic data. You can synthetically create data. That's a separate thing. You augment data by creating synthetic data, but we are not talking about that at all. We're talking about, hey, there was data, there was existing data, the machines got trained with that data, and now they're going to be making recommendations. So the machines will produce biased, unbiased, whatever you call it, based on the data that they were fed into. It is as simple as that. So it's very important to check for biases, and there are tools for that, right? You can check whether the data that I'm feeding into the machine from a training standpoint, is it biased or unbiased, right? Do you see that, hey, that 99 out of the 100 times a male was selected for this kind of a job, so it looks like a pretty biased data. So I will not use this data set for training my machine, because you know what, it's always going to put in male candidates. So sorry, this is not the right data set to train from. Let me normalize this data set, and that normalized data set is what the machine should learn from, right? So before you feed the data into the machine from a learning process standpoint, from a training standpoint, is where the check has to happen. There is no point doing the check after you've trained it. Then it is just producing what it was trained from, right? So it's that.
So Atul, let's talk about Blackstraw.ai before we close up here, because we're at kind of the top of the hour. But I just want to know, like, if somebody wants to reach out to you, and this is not designed to be an infomercial for you. We tapped you because you're probably one of the smartest people we know. You're in this space. There's a lot of chatter among our client base, like, man, what look at this cool thing that ChatGPT can do. What in the world are we going to do? That's why we wanted to do this. And I have a feeling we're going to have another part 2 at some point, because I think we've just barely scratched the surface. But what's the sweet spot of the type of company, and what are they coming to you to resolve? And that's a huge thing. But if there were specific pain points and the size of companies or whatever, because this could seem very complex and oh man, this is going to cost a ton of money to deal with, right? So
the right answer of that is with Adam, right? Adam has access to all the clients, their profiles, everything that we do, kind of money we get. So Adam can answer that question. But more data driven answer can be given by Adam. But
yeah,
the reality is that these, more than the money, yes, there is spend on these, but more than that, what's really important for these kind of things is persistence, right? AI solutions are not created especially custom solutions for your specific data sets and for your specific needs. Every system is nuanced, doesn't happen in a day or two, right? It'll take 6 months to a year, right? And what I have generally seen is and it's nothing against small business. I myself am a small business, so nothing against that. The problem with small businesses is that with so many vagaries that happen in a small business, that discipline to keep persistence is tough, right?
Yeah.
So our general sweet spot is companies between $1 billion and $10 billion of revenue, right? Because they have use cases. They have 3 things. They have use cases, they have data, and then they have the money to persist with it for a period of time. And that's why we call enterprises, those are enterprises. Much bigger enterprises don't come to companies like us because they go to the AWS and Microsoft of the world, and they essentially are like more careful, and they have the vendor and sourcing kind of checks that they have. Smaller companies do not have one of these three things: data, persistence, or money, right? Whatever you call it. So that's our sweet spot. And that's what I was saying. Adam would know most of our clientele is generally in that kind of a space. They're roughly $4-5 billion enterprises, most of them, with very specific cost or revenue targets to achieve through AI and AI systems.
Yeah, it's funny though, because even if, I was typing in the background as you were talking, Atul, because the recruiting thing was really fascinating to me. And I just think, like, even in our own case, I mean, we're obviously, as much as I'd want to be $1 billion company, we're not. But at the same time, we spent about 200 grand on recruiters last year, and, they were client. I love them. And, I won't say that I was happy to spend the money. That would be a bridge too far. But, we did, and we're happy with the candidates. But, I'm just writing down criteria. I'm like, God, if I could get some sort of automation around scraping LinkedIn in not an advertising way, but like, find me all the UNCC, ECU, App State, recent graduates, 1 to 5 years that work for regional accounting firms,
I'm going to make this easy for you. I'm going to do this for you. You're going to give me 6 months on invoicing discount, and we're done.
Well, that's my point. Because like, if you think about it, it's like, I'm already spending $200,000 every year. If I could spend it freaking once,
we're gonna give you that pro bono free. Just send me the criteria. Web scraping platforms is something that we already have, right? And what you're just describing on LinkedIn is a plugin that we already have. So whatever you need from that standpoint is pretty easy, and I'll not ask for a discount, I promise.
Jack's like, can I get some of that on the side too?
Me too. Count me in.
Yeah. We could have a groundswell. It's interesting. So as we're wrapping up, Atul, you did not disappoint, and I knew you wouldn't. And my only fear was us not getting you the link in time. So anyway, that happened. So thank you. There are some other folks that are in our ecosystem that I think, like, there's a group that is based out of Austin, Texas. These guys are involved in a LinkedIn group with me that are very, like, they're all in on RPA, and they focus on, like, the kind of companies that are on this call that are not necessarily multi-billion-dollar companies. I think we'll bring in some of that. We may even want to bring in the guys with AWIN, because we were a beta site for them, us and a multi-billion-dollar CPA firm that will be unnamed. They're good, but they like working with us because we really think out of the box. So we like that. That's kind of the way we like to roll. But those are some practical things for anybody listening to this and watching this right now that can be used. And we want to share those kind of things too. But Atul, you've just been wonderful. You are a wonderful guy anyway, but extremely smart. And I think we're going to need to continue tapping on this, because like, this is not going to be a one and done. I can tell right now, any more than talking about PPP was. That was not a one and done. So
no, thank you for having me. I absolutely, as I said, I was like, everybody likes working with you guys because you have Matt, but that's just because we
Matt Pugh.
Oh
yeah, Matt Pugh, he is awesome. He likes working with you too.
I'm sure you guys have many more of Matt, but he's awesome. And no, it's all good. Let me know anything I can do to help.
You got it, Atul. I definitely appreciate it, man.
Thank you. For anybody that came on late, we will put this up on the BGW CPA YouTube channel later on today. And if you're in Charlotte, North Carolina, look on my LinkedIn, because the founder of Reebok is going to be speaking here May 4 on resiliency and leadership. And fortunately, I get to share the stage and with him. So May 4, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Look on my LinkedIn and you can see some of the stuff about that. That'd be great. But that's cool that, and it's the first of 16 cities that Joe Foster, the founder of Reebok, is going to be speaking at. So we're fortunate. I think he may even be coming to Tampa at some point, Atul.
I'll let him know that, you know, I spoke to the same guy that he spoke to. So
you're so funny.
Right.
All right, guys, thank you so much for your day. Enjoy the day. I hope it's as pretty in Tampa as it is here today. Atul. Jack, thank you again. Thanks for keeping Hal like quiet back there. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. And, you know, poking, punching.
Yeah,
Fighting,
all right.
you know.
See you guys.
Thank
See
you
you guys.
guys.
All right, bye-bye. May the 4th.